It's 2 o'clock, and my phone rings. And on my phone, I see the name of the Senate Speaker. I take the phone and I say, "Good afternoon." He says, "Irungu, are you okay? Is there anything we can do?" As you probably know, the Jubilee government he's a majority leader within the Jubilee Senate. It was very different from what had happened the day before. The day before, I had stood down 100 police officers. I had stood with about 700 school children, courageously demanding that their playground should not be grabbed by anybody, but least of all, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. I'd been manhandled. Many of you saw me being thrown. Fortunately, I was wearing jeans, so they didn't rip. But I was thrown in the back of a black Mariah. And you may have heard, if you listen very carefully, to a police officer in uniform say, "Naweza kuua." And me replying to him, "No, you can't. There are too many cameras." I was tear-gassed like all the other children that day. And I spent the night in a prison cell in Langata. It was a very different day from the phone call that I received the day next. I'd like to go back to when I was 14. I was standing in a queue as a student, probably about the same age as the Langata Road primary school students. And I was waiting for a bus, and there were about 10 of us in this queue. And a woman at the front was standing very patiently when a stranger walked up to her and immediately grabbed her hair and began to pull her to the ground. She continued pulling at her hair until at one point we started to see her roots and blood on the ground. There were 10 of us in that queue. Nobody spoke, nobody acted. We all stood there powerless. The stranger finished, turned, and walked off. And the woman then stood up, and she looked at us, and she said, "Why didn't anybody say anything? Why didn't anybody act to help me?" And we all looked away again. And in that moment, at the age of 14, I said to myself that I will never look away or not act when somebody is in need in my presence. Fast forward, it's now 1985, I'm 19, and I've just had a very complex conversation and very short conversation with my uncle, and it went a bit like this. My uncle said, "Irungu, I've mapped it out. I know exactly what your career is going to be." So I said, "What is it, Uncle Doc?" And he said, "You're going to be a lawyer." And I said, "Why a lawyer?" And he said, "Because lawyers make lots of money, they drive big cars, and you will get great," and now I'll go back to Troy, "you will get great opportunities to find a great wife." So you see the socialization of men, huh? It's fairly sophisticated. That moment and that conversation was just enough for me to declare that I will never be a lawyer. I then spent the year thinking about just one problem. And that problem was, why is Africa so wealthy, so rich, so endowed, yet the majority of its people are so wretched, undignified, and live lives that are not safe or comfortable? I turned to my father and I said, "Dad," as one does at the age of 19, I said, "Dad, I'd like to do a road trip across Africa." I traveled 6,000 kilometers. I went across 6 countries. I was detained and deported in Zimbabwe for some infringement that it's not worth going into now. and Bob Mugabe has forgotten. I became destitute in Botswana. I literally ran out of money. I was basically at one point begging the police to arrest me so I could sleep in a police cell. So this conversation about cells is a recurrent one. And I came face to face with my racial identity in Swaziland. And in Swaziland, there are communities called mixed race people. Most of my life, I've always been a minority. In Zimbabwe, in Zambia, and Swaziland, there are actually ethnic groups called mixed race. What you people, somewhat confused people call, what do you call us? Pointees, etc., all those things, right? Yeah? Now, I don't blame you anymore. I used to. The polite term is mixed race. But anyway, let's not go there. So I had really 3 major personal crises. And what I learned from the crises was that in that process, you grow, right? You learn something about yourself and your ability to be able to respond to your circumstances. Now, many of us here, and myself included, we don't think of life in that way. We crave safety, we crave continuity, and we crave comfort. Now, those of you here from middle-class backgrounds, this is particularly important for us. We spend all our lives trying to rush away from Komarok because we don't play basketball and Troy won't be there. We spend all our times trying to choose partners that are safe. We live in houses that don't have neighborhoods because we're too frightened or we feel that it's risky to go meet the neighbors. Some of us live in apartments. And I come from Kilimani, Ahu for the Kilimanians. Okay, sorry, I was told to do that on Twitter. Some of us live in apartments that are beginning to look like, if you've ever seen a jar with lobsters or crabs trying to climb on top of each other to get to the top. And the funny thing is that we don't spend time talking to each other to work out how we could get to the top. We're just trying to jump and climb on top of each other. What if we lift our lives from the perspective that what gave our lives purpose and meaning was really expanding the space to take risks? What if we did that with our children? What if we did that with our loved ones, with our fathers and our mothers and our grandparents? What kind of lives could they create? I had a great life when I was the Pan-Africa director of Oxfam. I was there for 10 years. I had a budget of 600 million shillings per annum. I worked and impacted on 26 countries. There are no less than 12 or 15 covenants, policy standards, declarations of the United Nations, the African Union, the World Trade Organization that I have personally put full stops and commas. Now, most of you will not think that's important, but it's very important. It's very important. I had a desk job, but the people who were close to me, my then wife, experienced me as somebody who traveled too much. I was always away from home in some summit. I had children who could not explain to their friends what their father did. They would go like this. My son would say, Dad, what exactly do you do in the office? So-and-so's dad is a doctor. So-and-so's dad is a lawyer. So what do you do exactly? I know you work in an office, but are you like a receptionist? Do you answer calls and stuff like that? Now, me, I was at the top of my game at that time, right? I get to experience every day the courage and the conviction that Kenyans like yourselves take into spaces in which they are not expected to do that. I get to meet the widow of Alex Madaga, the security guard who spent 18 hours in an ambulance waiting and being denied access to emergency medical treatment. And I get to see how she responds to that. I get to hear of school children, like the children from the Thika School of the Blind, who had the courage to write a poem and a play and take it to State House about the Langata Road Primary School in solidarity with their co-students. And just have the interesting experience of the president being away. He travels a bit, as you probably noticed. That particular day that they were performing the play, the deputy president was present. Now that's courage. There were a ton of teachers who, if they were more sensible, less foolish, and less bold, they wouldn't have allowed that to happen. And imagine the children. You're in State House. At some point, you're thinking about your next job. Well, your first job. I get to experience that on a daily basis. I get to talk to the survivors of the Wagala massacre in 1984 when they survived torture and being left on an airstrip for 4 days. That courage, that boldness, that foolishness is really what, for me, makes this country great. So I don't have an experience of myself as bold and foolish, but I have an experience of myself as somebody who is an access, somebody who is a facilitator, somebody who can be a voice for those people who cannot speak in the corridors that they do. And that's why, in a sense, I do what I do. I want to leave you with this thought, that the walls that are out there are not as big or as tall as the walls that are inside here and inside there. By being bold, by being foolish, you can knock down some internal walls that will give you access to knocking down some walls for this country and make this country great. Something that you can believe in. Something that does not give you a feeling in the morning when you open the newspapers or you listen to the radio. We can all come together and make this country great. Many of the things, the moments that I've experienced, the 3 moments that I've shared with you, had people surrounding me at each point saying, "Are you crazy?" At 14, you wanted to interrupt something that could have even been a domestic issue. At 19, you wanted to do what? Why didn't you just ask, if you want to travel, go to America. It's much more civilized. It's quieter, you know. Not these one-party states in the 1985s where the economy is crashing and there's criminality and so on. And at the age of 49, you did what? You went to knock down a wall in a school? So have your children moved to Langata Road Primary School? I said, no, actually, to be honest, that was the first time I'd gone to Langata Road Primary School. I even had to ask somebody, where is that school? Consider that actually it is those actions, those points of crisis, personal crisis, that leave us with stories to tell, legacies to leave behind, and a country that is both great and both a country that you can be proud of. Thank you very much.